we're grazing that. And you could see that we have you can see that we have quite a few sheep in a small area. And that's okay, as long as they're getting enough to eat and they're not fighting or pushing each other or anything like that. You can have them fairly crowded, but just know that you got to make sure they're getting enough to eat, that it's enough grass to satisfy them. So we manage pretty tightly here. And over the years, over the last 15 years, we have almost tripled our number of animals we can have. When we first started, we could only have about 10, and now we can have about 30 almost, mature ewes, and that with their lambs. So it does make a difference. You want to manage for healthy soil. And if you look at, I know it's kind of hard to see on this picture, but you can see that piece of soil, there's a lot of manure in there, and there's a lot of worms and different insects. You want to have healthy live soil, and the sheep will help you do that. And that's why we chose sheep, is because they were going to help us better for a small piece of property. So there you go. Before, you got a hard clod of soil, almost no life in it. And then after a number of years of good management, you'll see there's all kinds of life and roots and everything in your soil. And so that's what you want to do. You want to manage that way. I'm not going to go on these slides. And that's kind of it. That's kind of what I have for my presentation. I'm always willing to, take some questions about what I have. And maybe now would be a good time to just go down through those questions, Anita.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Cindy. That was amazing. And Zoom being Zoom, of course, it decided to kick in the recording right in the middle of your presentation.
Right.
So we're probably going to go ahead and hang out and talk some more another time and have that put back in. Mm-hmm. But before we move on to the questions, does anybody have any questions regarding what was presented, for those of you that were here and able to hear it? Anything about Cindy's presentation? And you can either put it in the chat box or raise your hand. And if you wanted to know where to raise your hand at, there's a reaction button at the bottom of your screen that looks like a smiley face with a plus on it. If you click that, you'll have raise hand. And that will basically just indicate that that you have a question. So we'll just give it a few minutes and see if anybody has any questions. And while I get Cindy's website here in the chat box so that everyone can go ahead and access it. And then also, Cindy, I did put the link to the livestockconservancy.org in the chat box too.
Okay, and I'm adding NavajoLifeway.org. That's Dinipena, means people are life, but it's called, the website's www.navajoLifeway.org. And that we have the website's a work in progress. So, but eventually all the sheep is life information and other information will be up there too. So.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and can we stop screen sharing?
Sure.
Okay. All right. And then we are going to move on to questions. Okay. And I think that Bonnie has read our questions because she's leading in with a perfect question. How many acres of land to raise 10 sheep? And one of our questions was, what are the outdoor space needs per animal if they are fed by hay or grain, or if they're pasture grazed? So what would you say for acres to raise 10 sheep?
It depends on the kind of land you have. So let's just say sheep are going to be eating 4 or 5, maybe up, depending on the breed, up to 6 pounds of forage a day. So let's just say they're eating 5 pounds of forage a day, right? So your pasture needs to be able to provide 5 pounds a day for the length of time you want to be in there. So I got my calculator here. So I'm going 5 pounds times, let's say we have 10 sheep. So that means my pasture needs to provide 50 pounds then a day. And then let's say I have a 1 acre of land, 10 acres of land. Well, let's just go 1 acre of land. And on that land, I've gone out and you can measure this. I've gone out and I say, okay, it's June and there's 1,000 pounds out there, right? And I need 50 pounds to last a day for my 10 sheep divided by 50. So that pasture would last about 20 days. Okay, so everybody's going to be different. So that's why you have to go out and know how to measure the amount of forage you have out there. So I only have 5 acres of pasture and I'm running about 35, 40 adult animals along with about anywhere from 30 to 50 lambs every year out there. But my land is highly productive. I'm producing about 4 tons of forage an acre for the year. So I can hold a lot of sheep on a small area. If you're out on the rangeland, you don't have any irrigation, it's going to take a lot more area. Okay.
And Bonnie says, thank you. And yes, so some of the areas that I work in with both sheep and goats, any of the small ruminants, they're pretty dry rangelands. They're not irrigated. And so you are looking at having more acres for your sheep. And there's not a set number like I'm sorry, my brain it's been a long day, like Cindy was saying. But what you need to look at is understanding your rangeland and then in your forage and also and yes, Bonnie, this will be recorded. So yes, absolutely. And I will have these up, but yeah, you need to know your rangeland. You need to know what grasses are on there, what forage is on there, whether they're eating grasses or shrubs, things like that. So, so yes, it is dependent upon your area and actually also, the grasses that are growing.
So when you're planning your grazing, you got to know how much forage you have out there for the time you're going to be out there. You can adjust your numbers or you can adjust the area of land that they're grazing at a time. Okay. But when that forage is used up, it has to recover. If it can't recover out on the rangeland, it may not recover until the next year. So the worst thing you can do is just stay out there. So it's time to get them off and have another place to go with them or start feeding them hay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about shelter. Is shelter required, and are there times of year or weather events that we do require shelter?
Okay, well, once again, it depends a little bit on your breed and what you're doing with them. But my sheep, I just have shed roofs. I didn't even put a picture of what I have up. I probably should have. But I just have shed roofs and a little bit of protection from the wind. So you want them to be able to get out of the wind. That can be pretty bad for any breed of sheep. And you want them to be able to get out of the rain if they want to, which our sheep, they don't like the rain, but they couldn't care less about snow. They'll stay out there and they'll lay down in it, let it snow and pile up on top of them. So it just depends on the breed. But basically most sheep are going to want some shade at least part of the day during the hot time of the summer. And so for us, we don't have shade out in the pasture. We make it so that they can walk back to shade. Everybody's different. But a little bit of shade is good for them and protection from the wind when they need it. And especially during lambing, they're going to need protection from the elements, but not necessarily a lot of babying for the churro sheep. Now, other breeds, you're going to need more like heat lamps and a lot of straw and all that. We don't do that with these sheep because they don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest things that is interesting and so unique is that with the Navajo Churro sheep, they're so independent and they have so many things that are going for our area. And if you have other sheep that weren't as developed for this area. And I'm going to go ahead and get some examples. They don't have the same wool and they don't have the same ability. And sometimes they can actually get, based on where their wool is, whether it's like a 1 or 2 coat, then they can actually get wet and it can, get soggy, or they don't have enough to keep them warm. So it's definitely important to know your shelter requirements based on the breed you choose. I happen to, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, the other thing about wool is when it gets wet, and if you do have a rainy, and we do occasionally, even here in the desert, in the Four Corners, during a monsoon season, or even in the middle of winter, if you get them wet, that wool could mat up and felt right on them. Even with the churros, it can do that. And also it can cause skin irritation, and sometimes you get skin disease because the animals are too wet. And it can ruin the wool too. So that's why a lot of people who are really into the wool, they'll put jackets on their sheep and protect the wool from the elements and the fiber and the hay and everything else. So
absolutely. And yeah, if you look at something like Dorpers or some of the others, you're going to have different shelter requirements. And so the best advice that, that we could give is like, go and look at what breed you want and then determine what they're going to need for shelter. Are they going to be more hands-on versus are they going to be more independent? So on that, let's talk about fencing. So how high should we, do you need fencing, and how high should those fences be? And is it for predator protection? Is it for their safety? Like, what would be the fencing need or requirement?
Well, sheep like to jump. They're not as bad as goats, but they can jump. Our sheep can clear a 3 or 4 foot fence if they really want to. The rams are worse than the ewes, but for the most part, they'll stay in. They don't tend not to go through a fence unless they're out of feed, and then they'll go through an electric fence too, just to get to the feed on the other side. With our sheep, if you get one that's smart and turns into an escape artist, she'll teach all the other ones to do it. So, but we do use electric netting fence. I don't have a good picture of it, and that really helps to keep them in. 3 or 4 strands of electric will work. And then for cross fencing, I like to use just field fence or some type of woven wire fence. That way, they're just not going to get out, because they will crawl through barbed wire. They're not as easy to keep as other livestock that way. The bigger the sheep, the taller, the higher they can jump. So, my rams will go over 4 or 5 feet pretty easily if they want to. That's more of a if they want to than given. So.
And I did put a link into New Mexico State University, their sheep breeds that are best suited for arid climates. And it's a really cool kind of breakdown on some of the best sheep breeds for this area, for arid environments, for our environments. And, there's things from Merinos to the Navajo Churro to Dorpers. I mean, it pretty much has everything on here. So it gives you a lot of information on what breeds, and we do have questions later about the breeds, but this will just give you if you want to click on that and look at it, it'll give you an idea of some of the ones recommended for the arid types. That was a segue from the fencing. I think the most important thing that when we talk about fencing, especially in our area, and the biggest problem that we have is we do have predators. And so out here we do have some mountain lions, or we do have feral dogs, we have coyotes, things like that. And most of the times they will not go after the grown sheep unless they're very hungry. They will go after the lambs. And so one of the recommendations following what Cindy was saying was making sure they can't jump those, and that they're not jumpable by the actual predator. So that's one of the big concerns that we've had, is that normally we haven't had mountain lions in our areas, but they have moved in. So they're able to jump fences pretty well. So that's just something to consider, is looking at your predator situation. Keeping them in is always fun. I don't know, some days it's whether the goats or the sheep are the worst, but it's normally when someone's in heat and somebody wants to get over the fence to somebody else. So then they're very highly motivated, and they tend to break records that I did not expect. So that's just something to think about with fencing. And thank you, Cindy, for those ideas on fencing. That's great.
I could talk about what we do with predators. So we live with lions. They are here. They live here. They're here. They're walking around all the time. And we had one that decided he wanted to live kind of close to us. And he started taking our turkeys at night. And it was just a matter of time before he was going to try to get in with the sheep. So what we do now is we bring our sheep in at night. It's not a barn, so it's just a shed roof, but we have wire to the top. So they're wired in at night. It's not perfect, but it'll probably keep almost anything out unless they're really desperate. The other thing you can do, dogs are good for most cases, but you have to have the right kind of dog for lions. Donkeys are okay, but they tend to like to play with sheep, and which means sometimes they'll kill a sheep. So you got to be careful with that. Same thing with the llamas. You got to be careful with them too. But you need to understand your predator situation first. That will help.
Hello. Is it okay for me to talk?
Go ahead, Evan. We were hoping that people could go ahead and put it in the chat box, but since you go in and unmuted, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, I'm not used to Zoom, so I'm still trying to figure out how to do this. But Cindy brought up a question about using electrical fencing to keep them in. What kind of energizer or brand do you use for do you use solar, or do you have connections with electrical outlet?
So I'll just be really brief on this one. There's a lot to electric fencing. Everybody's going to be different. We just plug into electricity, but there's solar. The joules and the strength of it are really, really important. It has to be strong for sheep. It can't be, what works for cattle will not work for sheep. Your situation, you have to plan for the dry ground. It makes a difference. So there's a lot of factors. So you need to work with somebody who understands that and can get you set up right to begin with. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of money and have a lot of mistakes.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you for your question, Evan. That was a very good question, and I really appreciate it. And the other thing, when you're looking at electric fencing, is with solar, it's a little more maintenance. So you can have it out there in the middle of wherever you would like, but it's a little more maintenance because, depending on whether it's you have batteries and all kinds of different things, or you have a day that's not as sunny and the fence loses power, and then all of a sudden the sheep are out, versus where it's plugged in, but then you have to be close to a power source. So that it's kind of a catch-22 on where you're going to put it. A lot of people do love to use solar fences. The only thing that I will warn you is you do have to use a grounding pole on your fencing with solar. And in our soils, it's hard to get it. They say it's supposed to be around 6 feet deep to ground your fence. And I know I can't get it at 6 feet in the ground out here. So that's just something to consider too when you're looking at solar.
Right, and then the solar is generally not as reliable as being able to plug it in like we do. So yeah, and grounding is important. That's why you need to work. We use our T-posts for grounding, but we're irrigated, so it doesn't take as much as in the dry country. So you may need 3 or 4 T-posts out in the dry country to get a good ground. So that's pretty much it without going into too much detail.
how many jolts do you use?
I can't
for your
remember
fencing?
because I divide that between my husband and me, and he takes care of the electric. So I
Oh,
can't
okay.
answer it. All I know is it's strong. It's usually stronger than what you use for cattle. So
And Evan, if you look in the chat box, do you know how to get to the chat function?
No.
Okay, if you look on the chat box, I put a link to a University of Maine Cooperative Extension livestock thing on fences, electric fence design. And that will talk about how many joules you need. Because it depends on your fence length and then how many wires and then your conditions. So it kind of walks you through all that if you're looking for a calculation.
oh,
Okay.
one more point about sheep and electric. It's a psychological thing for them. Okay, if you have wool sheep, they're not going to be as affected by electric as something without wool. So you have to train them to it, so they're afraid of it. So every spring we put electric in their sheep in their pen. We put feed on the other side, and we train them, especially the young animals, so they remember that if they touch that fence, they're going to get shocked. And that's a psychological thing. Once they learn they can go through, they'll go through, and that's why we use the netting. It's just easier, but there's pluses and minuses to that too. That's why you got to study for yourself. So
Absolutely. And that was a great discussion. I definitely appreciate it, and I appreciate the question. So we're going to move along here. We're going to talk about some feed and nutrition. So I'll start off, we talked about a little bit, but what are the daily feed requirements? And then is it per day, per animal, or by weight?
okay, so I'm going to write this too in the chat box. Sheep need to eat about between 0.025, between 2.5% and 3% of their body weight per day. Okay, and then a little bit more when they're pregnant. Okay, so the larger the sheep, the more it's going to eat. So a 150-pound ram is going to eat about 5 pounds a day. And that's dry, that's just dry forage. Okay, that's not like wet grass. So if you're measuring your forage out in your pasture, you have to clip it and dry it to see how much is out there. But if you just use hay, you're going to measure out that much. So one animal. So then during pregnancy, my ewes will eat 4 pounds a day when they're dry, but when they're pregnant and they're nursing, they need 5 pounds a day. So you have to know what your animal needs based on that. But it's the same, about 2.5 to 3% per pound of body weight, no matter what kind of animal, even a cow. So that's the calculation you use. And then you got to look at the quality of the feed. If sheep pretty much need good quality grass. Some breeds need more. They need maybe some alfalfa in there. But for the most part, just good quality grass with a little alfalfa is all I feed. I don't feed too much alfalfa because churro sheep bloat really easily. And so we keep that to the minimum. So
I'll mute myself here. Yeah, absolutely. And any of the biggest things to talk about is alfalfa and other legumes are bloating in some circumstances with some sheep breeds. So you really need to know your breed and what they can and cannot eat. A lot of times too, I've been told by a few breeders, alfalfa is not necessary unless it's really cold or if they need to keep their warmth. So a lot of people will not feed their animals any alfalfa because of the bloat, the fear of bloat. I did put another paper, just kind of blasting you guys with papers tonight from New Mexico State University. They do a lot of research on sheep, and this has the nutrition, the importance of proper nutrition, and it's broken down by the life stage and then by the actual sex of the animal. So whether it's the ram or the lamb or the ewe. So it's a really, really good paper. It's kind of complex, It's just giving you an idea of what it would look like if they what they need. The biggest thing is, if you think about if you have a an excuse my my pronunciation, if you have one that is currently pregnant and they're needing to give food to themselves, and then they're growing baby, and then after they have that lamb, or and sorry, I'm thinking in goat terms of calving, but after they lamb, then they're lactating, and so they're needing to have enough food and intake to produce milk for themselves, or excuse me, produce milk for their babies and keep weight on themselves. So they're going to eat more during that time. And so there's a table in this paper that talks about the body weight and how much gain you want them to have versus whether it's a gestation period or whether it's a lactation period. So and I think the same thing kind of falls within the rams. A lot of times when they're before breeding, they will need a little bit more nutrition because they tend to focus on breeding as opposed to eating. So they do need some additional supplementation for food. So this is just a really good paper that talks about, you know, kind of what to look for. It is complex because it's giving numbers, not like give them 2 flakes of hay or let them graze for X number of days. It'll just give you an idea to work with, maybe a specialist, someone like Cindy, that can tell you what they need directly.
So yeah, and you just got to understand your breed. Ours are pretty easy keepers. They don't need grain, but other breeds may need some grain, especially during pregnancy, late pregnancy. They can have trouble bringing in enough calories to keep their bodies going. So sometimes you need to feed some grain, and other times a little legume like alfalfa is good because it's going to provide, another thing it provides is calcium. And in the winter time, your pastures, your rangelands are low on vitamins. And that's one thing that it'll bring in, is a little bit of vitamin A and calcium, which is important, especially to pregnant ewes. So you got to know your breed, and then they all need minerals. Sheep need to have a mineral mix, just for sheep only. You can't feed the same thing that you feed to your horses or your cattle, because sheep cannot have copper like they do. So that when you get your sheep, you need to get a sheep mineral mix just for them. So.
Right, and that's something I wanted to highlight, is copper is not good for sheep. So if you have goats and sheep that share the same pen, do not give them the same supplements at all in any way whatsoever, because of the copper. Okay, see here, we talked about supplements. Okay, body condition scoring charts. Is there a chart, and can you just kind of explain like some of the body condition scores, like the points on the body or anything like?
Yeah, there's charts. I don't have one handy. I could dig around in my files and pull one up. But let's just say body condition. You rather than me, yeah, there you go. You got one. Can you hear me?
Unmute. All right. Yes. Can you see that?
I can see that. I don't know where all our, oh, there's our participants. So I saw the body condition chart for a while. I don't know where it went.
Oh, okay. Oh no.
Anyhow.
Okay. Yes. I'm gonna stop sharing because Zoom's not gonna be nice.
Yeah, so you guys, you can look this up on the web. It's pretty easy to find. You need to just look up body condition for sheep. And there's a scale of, what is it, 1 through 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 1, they're skinny. You can see it. Their ribs are showing, you know, their necks look awful. So 1 is really skinny. 2 is just a little bit on the thin side. You can feel their ribs and their backbones stick out, but they're not totally thin. They're just a little thin. And 3 is average. They're just nice, average, good looking sheep. You don't see the ribs, nothing sticking out, but they're not fat either. And then 4, they're starting to get fat, and 5, they are really fat. You know, you can see it. And on the commercial type breeds, you will see a lot of jiggly fat on the rear end. You won't, in the churros, you'll see it in their bellies. They'll have these huge bellies. And also sometimes in the neck and other places. So you don't want your sheep too fat. You don't want them too thin. You want them right there at a 3. If you can keep them there, my ewes will go down to 2 after we wean the lambs off. They'll be pretty depleted. So we have to build them back up before we breed again. The rams, you don't want them too fat. It's just, it's a waste of feed, and they won't perform that well for you. So.
Yeah, and one of the best ways too is to get your hands on your animal and feel their spine. So get a good feeling of the spine. So like a 1, you know, so if you're looking at like a 1, that spine is like right there. It is like a triangle. Whereas, and you can feel it, you can see it. And then when you move up the scale, so like a 3, you know, it's going to be more rounded, and you're going to feel that spine, but it's going to be a nice round. And then when you kind of get to a 5 where they're really fat, it's almost going to be like divoted, and it's going to be like almost, there's going to be like a little U where the spine is. You can feel it, but then there's just going to be a bunch of fat around the spine. So that is one of the best ways to tell is if your animal's getting enough food, is feel that spine and see where all that fat is. Is there any fat, or is there no fat? And then you can look at that and adjust the feed based on that too. Keeping in mind too that sometimes after breeding, and especially, after lambing, then they're going to take off weight. So that's another time, when you're going to have to, you know, figure out where they're at with their condition, especially post lambing.
So I found it. If you want, do you want me to show it?
I posted one here in the chat too.
Okay.
So either
one. So they could look that up themselves. It's pretty easy to understand. It's just another thing you got to be aware of. So.
And then just a quick pause. It's about 6 o'clock. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we'll either we'll get to them now, or we can get to them at the end, depending on the question, and we will save time. So don't be shy on the questions, and we'll get to them. You can also, at some point, if you raise your hand, you know, we'll go ahead and answer those questions. Okay, talked about supplementing. We talked about feeding and nutrition. Let's talk a little bit about breeds. So you have a specific breed that is actually it's more dual purpose. It's actually like a triple purpose. But what is the difference between a dairy sheep and a meat sheep and a hair or wool sheep?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So a hair sheep, they may have a little tiny bit of wool that sheds off, but for the most part, you don't shear them. They don't have enough wool on them to shear. So they're like sheep without wool. And it's more hair-like. But then a wool sheep, like I said earlier, you can have a very fine wool, and there are some merino breeds that are extremely fine, and they're a microfiber that's very in high demand for things like fire retardant underwear for the military, let's say. Oh, that's something else I should mention. Wool doesn't burn. The flash point on wool is 600 degrees. So it makes a really good fire retardant clothing. So microfibers are used for that because it's against the skin. But then you've got sheep like Shetlands and them that just really good for weaving and also spinning and making sweaters out of. Rambouillet's wool is not as good a quality as, let's say, a merino, but it's a fine wool too. So you got to just kind of figure out what you want. And so some people want everything, like I have with my sheep, but other people are just going to want meat sheep. So they go with the hair sheep, and that way you don't have to mess with shearing, because shearing is expensive and wool market is a tough one to get into. So we are lacking wool processing in the United States. So a lot of the commercial wool gets shipped to China. So that's the nature of the industry. So you need to kind of understand one, but if you're a fiber artist and you like to play with wool, get a fiber animal. There's a lot of different kinds of good fiber, different colored animals, rare breeds, heritage breeds out there. What else? What did I miss? Did I miss something?
No, that's really good, because some of it is like, some people have asked, is there such thing as a dairy sheep? We know there's meat sheep because we know there's a meat market and it's competitive with the cattle market at any given time. But what about dairy sheep? Is there, are there specific dairy breeds for sheep?
What you want is a heavy milker, a heavy milk producer. And that's what the Churro sheep that are still in Spain, and I don't have a picture of them to show, but they are milk. They're there for milk. Okay. They're milking sheep, and they make some really wonderful cheeses out of that milk. So these guys are descendants of that. And so they have a high fat content. And so that's the kind of milk you want. Now, I'm not familiar with the other breeds that are good for milk. And there's a gal in Texas that's making wonderful soaps out of her churro milk. So you can make soap out of them. You can make cheeses, you can make fudge. It's just a really good to work with. But in Spain, they still do a lot of milking with sheep, and the Churro is one of the breeds that they do. So, and by the way, it's endangered there too. So
it's amazing it's the work you're doing. And we did talk about it at the very beginning, but we had people join us a little bit later. What is a heritage or heirloom breed? What does that designation mean?
Okay, so heirloom or heritage, generally you're looking at something that has a history that it's almost easier to start on the other end. I've used the word commercial breed. That means that they've been genetically improved to do certain things like meat production or wool production, very fine wool, or heavy duty, lots of meat like Dorpers and some of the other hair sheep. So, or else a milking sheep. So they're improved, and we bred them that way. And some of them can handle feedlot too. And that's the other thing. A lot of commercial meat lamb is raised in feedlots, just like cattle are. Okay, then what you have with your heritage ones, they tend to be unimproved, which means they haven't been messed with a whole lot, yet they still may have different uses. And a lot of your heritage breeds are dual purpose with the cattle and other animals. You can milk them, and you can shear them, you can raise them for meat, because we haven't made them into specialized animals. Now, a rare one or an endangered one, that's because there are not enough left in the world to guarantee that they'll exist in the future. So what the Livestock Conservancy does is it bases its categories as critical, threatened, and then on watch and recovered. Okay, so the Navajo Churro Sheep are in the critical category, and the reason why they are is because there's less than 200 registrations a year being filed with the Breed Association. But there still are a lot of churros out there, right? Maybe 10,000. But there's not enough being registered. It's the people who are registering the animals that are going to protect the genetics. Because when you don't have enough of a gene pool on a breed, you're going to have trouble with inbreeding and crossbreeding and potentially lose the breed. And it could take only a couple generations and it'll be gone. So that's what the Livestock Conservancy does. So then let's say there's over 200, but still less than 1,000, then they'd be threatened. And then on watch means, hey, maybe there's some progress being made, or maybe it's not as bad off, and then recovered. And then there's another category, study, because they don't know for sure what's going on. One of the new ones they're looking at now is Choctaw pigs. So it's dicey. Once an animal's gone, it's gone forever, and the breed's gone. And we have lost a lot of breeds, especially in the poultry, turkeys, horses. Almost all of the draft horses are endangered.
It's so amazing, how we take it for granted. We really do. And so I get a lot of calls on two particular breeds at my office. One is Navajo Churro, and then the other one is the painted desert sheep from Texas, which is, it looks like crossing Mouflon with Rambouillet, Merino, and Texas Black Belly, and then breeding in a Jacob or Navajo for the horns. And one of the biggest things that with the painted desert, why people like them down in the lower desert, is because they're not wool sheep, they're hair sheep, and they're flashy and they're pretty. So so that is one of the ones that I get a lot of calls about, asking, how they do in the Colorado Plateau area, Four Corners, in my area of Navajo and Apache counties. Do you have any experience with painted desert sheep?
Not really. It is one of those more mixed breeds. I think they're okay, probably okay in most of the Southwest, but I really don't know. So that's where you have to kind of look up and find out more and work with somebody. There are breeds of sheep that are grown, and churros is one of them, just for their horns, because they got 4 horns, or they got pretty horns, or they're just good to look at. There's a whole, people will breed some of these sheep for hunting too. And I think the painted sheep is one of those,
They're listed as meat and trophy for their horns. So yeah, looking at, it's another dual purpose. Like, honestly, I didn't even know that was something that existed, where a purpose would be for hunting and for their horns.
We harvest the horns off our sheep too. We don't, sometimes they're pretty good. Sometimes I get a pretty good set of horns, or a good set of 4 horns, and they sell too. So that's another product.
Okay, perfect. And these are all, we're going to talk a little bit about markets, so we'll go ahead and we'll move on to health. But Leslie, I did see your question, and we're going to go ahead and actually get to that when we talk about products towards the end. So stand by on that one. But for now, let's talk about health. Like, what are some of the requirements as far as veterinary needs and vaccines for health?
Okay, so you're going to want, there's a vaccine that we use. It's an 8-way. You definitely want to vaccinate for overeating, which is a Clostridium type disease. There's a couple different types. Overeating is when you get an imbalance in the acid in the gut of the animal, and then it allows a certain bacteria to grow, and they bloat, frothy bloat. They die usually pretty quickly from it. It's simple. Just vaccinate, and you're going to reduce your chances of that kind of thing happening a lot. It doesn't totally eliminate it. And then you always want to do tetanus. That's another one. And then there's a couple others. So like I say, we use what they call an 8-way, and we vaccinate. You need to vaccinate at least once a year. We vaccinate twice a year because we shear twice a year. So we vaccinate each time we shear the youth, and the youth will vaccinate. Right now in March, we shear in March, we vaccinate so that it's in their system when they lamb in April. And then the lambs will pick up on that. And then you vaccinate your lambs twice, once about at a month age, and once again at 3 months. And that'll protect them from most everything. And then there's another one called CLA. It's a disease that they get. I don't say it very well. Do you know how to say it? Anyhow, the CLA, we vaccinate for that too, but it's not a for sure thing, but we vaccinate for it because we do a lot of starter flocks, so we're careful. And so we vaccinate for that as well. And that's about it, once or twice a year for the mature animals, and definitely twice at first for the lambs. You need the first shot and then a booster shot, and then you're good. Some people don't vaccinate at all, but I do know they have losses that I don't have. So I don't like to see animals suffer, so I vaccinate. What else do we need to cover?
One of the things that we need to talk about with vaccinations, we do get a lot of questions. If I don't vaccinate, what should I do? If you don't vaccinate, then you need to have biosecurity on your ranch or your farm. Biosecurity is key, which means keeping all disease away from your farm. And that can include on your shoes from visiting another farm. That can include, if you're going to go to a producer's meeting and you change your shoes before you get in the house, where someone could have walked, and brought a disease into that meeting, and then you take it back to your farm on your shoes. It sounds silly, but that is some of the best ways to prevent disease. And I have had to tube. I've had frothy bloat, and I've had to tube, and this was a goat. It's not pleasant, and it's a horrible experience having to do it. So it is something that you want to consider, is for every action, there's an opposite reaction. So you just want to be careful in determining what your vaccine regimen is going to look like, and what is right for your farm, and what is going to work. Keep a closed herd, which means that if you get animals that come in, then you're going to quarantine those animals away from all your other animals for a set period of time, sometimes up to 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the circumstances, normally 2 weeks away from your herd. And then if they develop a disease, it's not going to affect your herd. But that also means that you cannot use that space after your quarantine until it's been cleaned. So there's a lot to consider, whether it's biosecurity versus vaccinations. You still should practice good biosecurity even if you do vaccinate, but it's imperative if you don't vaccinate to go ahead and practice your biosecurity. And I mean, like, I keep a dish of bleach water, next to my door when I'm going out down to my barn. So it just kind of depends on how you want to do it, but there's a lot of different ways. So that one, okay, so vaccines. Michelle did post, it's very important. It was stressed on the produce farms she toured, and packing sheds and bleach and things like that. And then, so absolutely, Michelle, and it's as important in farms and food and animals, the whole 9 yards. And then Leslie did post, I would talk to your vet about doing just the CDT or the 8-way. Her vet said it was fine for Holbrook, but in Chino Valley, yes, to do 8-way. Also, if you're going to do lots of shows, you want to do 8-way, and then you're going to want to wash, disinfect sheep and trailer before you come home. And yeah, so the kids aren't bringing stuff on your land. And then sore mouth spores take years to get rid of in the soil. And absolutely, the sore mouth is one of the worst things to try to get rid of. Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah, right. So yeah, one of the worst things you can do is bring sheep onto your property that you don't know where they came from, or you don't know how well they were taken care of. That's how you get worms and parasites and other diseases. I brought barber pole worm in from Oregon, and it was not a fun thing to deal with. So you got to be very careful. You got to quarantine sheep. I worm everything twice with 2 different wormers before I put it in with my flock. Most people, if you manage really tightly and you don't bring other animals in, you can get by without having to worm a whole lot. But if you're doing anything like I do, where you're always bringing animals in and stuff, then you're going to probably need a regular worming program. Some things just live in the soil, like E. coli. Staph, pneumonia, all of that's common, but some of it you bring on by going to shows. I brought on polyarthritis. It's a form of pneumonia, and I got that by taking my animals to a show. Brought it home, almost lost a couple over that. So you got to be very careful when you do that. But the CDT, the Clostridium diseases, tetanus, they're just there. So that's why that vaccination's probably good. And she's right. If you're messing around with a lot of different sheep like I am and going places with them, you need the 8-way. If you don't do that, you're probably good enough just with the CDT. So yeah. So, but there's a lot to it. And every year something new that you never could ever have imagined happened. Like we had milkweed poisoning. So that's another thing to look for, is poisoning.
Keep muting myself.
Fecal sample, yes, that's one of the best ways to figure out what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on a side note on that, coccidosis, which is it actually occurs naturally, and worms most of the time do occur naturally in the animal. It's when you have a stressful event or an activating event that actually makes the load worse and causes issues to the animal. So one of the, jumping back to Evan's question about diatomaceous earth, diatomaceous earth has I don't know the correct terminology. It has a place, but a lot of times it's very misunderstood. So diatomaceous earth is tiny, it's like itty bitty little tiny, I guess they're like shells, pieces of shell. And what they do is they're supposed to actually kill an insect when they're ingested, when the insect actually ingests this diatomaceous earth, it will like tear them up, and it causes all kinds of issues to the insect or the worm or whatever. However, the problem is in order to work, it has to stay dry. And so if you're giving your animal diatomaceous earth, it's not going to stay dry to work. So you can spread it on the ground, and the science is iffy about whether it's actually helpful. I've found it helpful in reducing fleas and other external issues, and when used in conjunction with some other things. I was in the military. I have some issues medically, so I cannot use chemicals and on my animals or myself. So I have to have people help me do a lot of the chemical parts, but I use a lot of non-traditional ways. So like tea tree oil and diatomaceous earth. But if it's wet, it invalidates the whole purpose of the diatomaceous earth. So just something to consider, that you can try to use it, but you're gonna want a backup plan. Cindy, you got any?
Yeah, I agree. The only time that I found diatomaceous work really well was on bed bugs with my chickens. So external parasites, if it's dry. Trouble is with sheep, you've got wool on them probably, so that's going to make it hard to use it. But cattle ranchers will make a dust out of it where they can dust themselves with it. But sheep would be harder to do that with. However, we use pyrethrins for most of our external. They're fairly benign. It's not as bad as some of the other things. But we use that for our external, and we don't have a problem with that, anything like that in our sheep. So they can get KEDS. It's like a fly without wings, but they can only go from animal to animal. They don't fly. So once you get rid of something like that, they're gone for good. Just keep your flock clean. Let me see. So we use pyrethrins. We do worm. Another problem is nasal bots. That's a common problem. And the flies will lay their larvae, and they go up into the nasal of the sheep, and you can tell because they're miserable. They're shaking their heads and they're blowing snot out. If it gets bad enough, they can get sick. They can get a sinus infection or have damaged sinuses. Once that happens, then you got a sheep with snotty nose forever. But the thing is lots of times the only thing that'll take care of that, besides preventative measures to keep the flies down in your area, is ivermectin. So a lot of people use it just for that purpose alone. So
yeah, and just jumping back really quick to Leslie's comment about building up resistance on worm loads. one of the biggest mistakes that people do is not getting a fecal sample. And it's hard because if you don't have a vet available and you have to pay for your fecal sample, then you don't, it's hard for people to access to get that information for your worm load. So if you can work with a vet to be able to pull those and do get your average worm loads before you deworm, it's awesome to have a set schedule. I have not had a problem with resistance yet, but because I bounce between different dewormers, and then I use an actual like I'll use one kind, and then I'll do a supplementary dose of another kind. So I'm trying to keep them from getting a resistance, but unfortunately right now, most of the worms out there are building up a resistance to all dewormers. So work with your vet on it if you have the ability. Let's talk about trimming hooves and shearing. How often do you need to? Oh, wait, Leslie said, be careful worming. Some can cause abortions in pregnant ewes. Very good point. Absolutely. And that's where work with your vet is going to be priority number one. So, okay. How often do we need to trim hooves or shear?
It depends a little bit on your environment with the hooves. If you're in a dry environment with a lot of rocks and stones, you may not have to trim them very often, only occasionally, maybe once a year at the most. If you're in a softer environment, like what we have with our irrigated, you're probably best off trimming twice a year. Now, if you're back east in a really wet environment, then you may have problems with foot rot, which thank goodness we're in arid country here. But in those climates, they can get a really terrible thing called foot rot with their hooves. And that's a nasty one to treat. I've worked with clients back east, and you don't want to mess with that. So I don't think, I have never heard of anybody out here having a problem with that. But you want to trim your hooves because it's an animal with the hooves not trimmed. They'll actually get deformed and they'll walk funny and they'll break down early in life too. It puts stress on the hock, and that they'll just break down and get arthritic and crippled up early in life. And then you can also get damaged hooves to the point of getting infections. So hoof trimming is important. Shearing, we shear twice a year because we have sheep that produce a lot of wool. And if we don't shear twice a year, we're going to have dirty wool that's not very marketable. So to have high quality fleeces, and I sell my fleeces mostly to hand spinners, I need to shear twice a year. Most people can get by with once a year. And it depends. If you're processing the wool and using it yourself and you don't mind taking extra time to clean it up, then once a year is probably just fine with these churros. If you're selling to high-end hand spinners like I do, it's got to be perfect. So I don't coat them. I have a thing about coating sheep. I think it's kind of inhumane, but that's just me. But I like to sell the hand spinners, so I do twice a year. Other people can get by. Your hair sheep, you don't have to worry about it. So
if what happens if someone misses a year with their sheep? Is it going to affect them shearing them? Or is it going to affect them their health? Can it be a problem to that sheep?
It most certainly can. I've rescued sheep that haven't been shorn for over a year, and it'll mat up. They will get skin disease, they'll get parasites, the wool is ruined. I had a gal buy a beautiful ram from me, didn't shear him in time, and she thinks she died from heat exhaustion. So yeah, you got to do it. It's inhumane not to shear them.
Okay. And that's good to know. That's a lot of questions we get is how often do they need to shear? And is it easier to pay someone to shear or to do it yourself? Like, is there some process that people can go through to learn how to shear?
It's hard to find good shearers, especially for small flocks. And yes, it is expensive. It's $10 to $15 an animal. And so we learned how to do it ourselves. Okay. And you can learn just with friends, people who know how to do it, they can teach you. You can hand shear with the clippers, or you can do the electric shears. So the other thing we've done that a lot of people don't think is possible with churros is we've trained them to be shorn on a stand. And the reason why we do that is because at our age, it's just too hard for us to put them down on the ground and shear them. So they love it. They get a treat. They stand still. You got to have the right kind of head gear for them to hold them on the stand. So we learned to do it ourselves. We take really good care of the wool. We take really good care of the animals. So when we shear them, we've trained them to trim their hooves on the stand, where we just pick them up and trim the hooves right there like you do a horse. Almost everybody will hold still. There's a few that won't. And it's easier on them too. And it is, if you're not careful, you can kill a sheep shearing. So you got to be careful.
Leslie did post that someone said they don't hoof trim because they'll break off on their own. And it's like your fingernails that can break beyond the quick and get an infection, and then it hurts to walk. I think there's a lot of missing context there, because it will really depend on the breed. It depend on their hoof wall and how that's developing, and then it will depend on the area they're walking. If it's really rocky, I know everyone that I have that have sheep, they have to trim the hoof, because if not, that hoof, the outside of the hoof will kind of start to curl in under. But that's their sheep. So I think there's a lot of context behind it that would need to be addressed. And it would be good to work with, depending on the breed and depending on someone that knows, if they know the breed, and if they're a breeder and that's how the breed is, then absolutely, I would hate to say otherwise. But I know there's a few breeds out there that you have to cut their hoofs, because they cannot shed that hoof wall.
Right. And, and they'll curl under, or they'll grow out and get really flat. They're subject to being broken off. They have trouble walking. It hurts their legs. Like I said earlier, they can break down. Their hocks will break down, and they can have all kinds of trouble. So you got to pay attention with the hooves, what's going on. Lots of times you see a sheep limping, it's probably something with their hoof. So,
and absolutely, Leslie, there is a professional guy in the Valley that comes up, and they will share costs, and the professionals are so cool to watch. I mean, once they just flip them on the back and they shear, and they're done. I love watching it. The only downside, and we'll get to it in a few minutes, is the fact that if you're paying, a certain amount per sheep, and then you're only getting a certain amount per piece of wool, or, however you're actually going to be marketing your wool, you have to just make sure if it's worthwhile. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I want to just talk a couple things about, a lot of people will call and say, I want sheep to control my weeds. That's why I want them. Can they graze everything? Are there poisonous plants they cannot graze? Cindy, you mentioned having poisoning issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just like you got to know your forage, you need to know what kind of weeds or poisonous plants you have out there. So there are a few poisonous plants that you just really don't want to have. The nightshade family, there's a few nightshades that can be highly poisonous. Nowadays, we got milkweed everywhere in our irrigated pastures and hayland. And so if you're buying hay, you got to make sure there's no milkweed in it. And that's what happened to us. We had milkweed in the hay, and we didn't know it. And we went out, we found 2 animals dead, and 3 were struggling. And then my ram went down too. We saved 4 out of the 6, 2 died. It was awful. And we didn't know what it was at first. So our vet had us throwing the kitchen sink at them, but deactivated charcoal, keeping them walking, making them eat. We had to drench them with water. It was 24/7 for a few days. And, but we did pull them through. So you don't want to have that happen. And then we had one die the next summer, and she got it right out in our own pasture. So when we go out now, before we graze, we go out and look for it. And if it's out there, we'll pull it out by hand. It's really hard to kill with chemicals, and you don't want to graze it. But there's not too much else. There's different kinds of milkweed, so you just got to learn what's out there. But sheep love forbs, okay? So they love bindweed, they love thistle, they love dandelion, they love a lot of the forbs out on the rangelands. And so that's all good for them. And there are some rangelands species, some rabbit brush and snakeweed, that at the wrong time of year, they can be somewhat toxic to them. So, you know, that's another thing to learn too. There's different times of years to graze different plants. So, and a lot of this is why we need to keep our traditional wisdom in place, whether it's Anglo or Hispanic or Native American. We have to keep that knowledge there, because those are the people who know those things. And it's really good if you can partner up and learn from some of these people. So
Absolutely. Mentoring and having a mentor is amazing right now, because a lot of people, there's a transition between older generations and our elders and newer generations taking over, and some of that knowledge is not being passed on. And so having the mentorship is huge, especially when it comes to these plants. I did put a link in, and it is to it's 120 pages, so please don't print this off, but if you can stick it on your phone or whatever, it's called Poisonous Plants Poisonous to Livestock in the Western States. And it covers all livestock, and it covers the different plants. It's not all the plants, but it is a bunch of the plants. And then it talks about symptoms, and it talks about where the distribution of it is, and kind of what to look for in the animal and the time of year when it could be the most poisonous. I give my animals cochia, which is, they love it, and it's like bindweed. But when it goes to flower, it's actually more poisonous. So you have to know when and where to actually let the animal eat that. And one of the biggest issues we have is people get livestock and they're like, I'm not going to feed it. I'm going to put it out there because it's going to eat my weeds. And then all of a sudden you have significant illnesses and deceased livestock, or abortions from poisonous plants, and just the list goes on. So having this resource and knowing your plants and having your mentorship and being able to get in touch with those people that know and understand the land is huge when it comes to getting animals for grazing, for weed removal. There are actual like contractors that will go out and they will have goats and sheep, and they'll graze areas for fire or fuels reduction for wildfires. But however, they have a shepherd with them that knows what those plants are, and they identify the plants first. So they don't just throw the sheep and the goats out there. So it's really important to know that. And then Leslie asks, does UofA extension in Tucson have poisonous plants list for Arizona or by county? So that is part of one of my jobs up here in Navajo and Apache County, but you can down by Tucson. Ashley Wright is a livestock agent down there, and she is very, very good with poisonous plants and livestock. So it's just getting with your extension agent and getting with them, and they can help do some on the ground discussions as to the poisonous plants. And we're more than happy to. I love plants. That's kind of like my first thing that I do. And I love talking about plants and using livestock and plants. So, but again, a milkweed everyone loves it because it's a native plant that has a beautiful flower and it attracts butterflies. So everybody plants it in their yards because, who doesn't love a native flowering plant that attracts butterflies? Well, if you have livestock, it's poisonous to livestock. So that's why you need to know kind of like what you have and what your goals are. And then yes, absolutely. Put your own vet care kit together. And do you want to address that, Cindy, what that means?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, eventually you're gonna have a whole big kit in one way or another, whether you do it on purpose or through time. But you're gonna want things like vet wrap and gauze. You're gonna want iodine. You're gonna want peroxide, things like that. Just because they do things, they get injuries, especially the lambs. And then eye wash. Lots of times you get pink eye or you get some kind of something in their eyes, so you want to have eye wash on hand. We keep some antibiotics on hand just in case, just penicillin G. If they get an infection or pneumonia, you want to treat it right away, and then consult a vet. We're short on vets where we live, so we have to do a lot of things ourselves. And luckily we have a good mobile vet. I can always call her, but I can't always get her out here. So sometimes you have to do some people have suture kits and things like that. Let me see, am I missing anything important? But you want to be able to take care of any kind of wounds. Then the other thing is when you're lambing, you're going to need some things for that too, because you need to take care of them. You need to be able to clip their umbilical cord and dip it in iodine. That's clip and dip. You do that at birth. That prevents them getting infections. You might need to have rubber gloves. You might need to not rubber, but then what do you call those gloves? The blue gloves, and lube kit. So you may need to go in and help that lamb be delivered. And there's visuals on the internet. It's tough, but lots of times you're the only one there. So you need to learn how to do these things. I rarely have to do much with my ewes, but every now and then I've had to go in and help her. Sometimes it's just a leg backwards. It's not too hard. Sometimes it's just a big ram with big head and you just have to help her out a little bit. But the most common problem I have is them coming out backwards. So you have to be very clean when you handle the animal like that. If you put your hand in, you gotta be very, very careful that don't hurt that ewe, because you can cause a bleeding problem and they'll die from that. So you need to be very careful and a lot of hygiene, and then be very careful every time you handle the udder. You might need to unplug that udder you got to make sure the lambs are nursing. And if they're having trouble, it could be that her teat is plugged up. So you might have to unplug it, but be very hygienic when you do that. Sanitize your hands, be very clean, because the last thing you want is mastitis. And that's an infection they get in their udders, and it can be deadly. So you got to be very careful about that. But lambs will get little pneumonias. Lambs will get E. coli. We have antibacterial for when they get diarrhea. It's actually listed. That's the other problem. A lot of things are not listed for sheep that could be listed. So I won't say what I use that's not listed, because it's probably not proper, but that's where if you have a vet, they'll say, go get this, that'll help you. It's not listed for sheep, but use it. So luckily I have vets that'll work with me like that. But a little bit of cord in the water in the springtime for the ewes to get cleaned up, and then later on when the lambs come, will help you with the E. coli, because that's a pretty common problem with lambs, along with pneumonias. So
yeah, absolutely. And then one of the other things that we deal with over here is sometimes our hay comes from a selenium deficient area, and so they're not, we'll have some babies born with what's like it's a white muscle disease. It's a lack of selenium. So we always give for all small ruminants, we give a little bit of selenium with vitamin E paste, and that's from one of my vets. With a disclaimer, we're not vets, and so we're not giving veterinarian advice, and there are amazing vets out there. So if you have access to one, I mean, we have a new mobile vet that I absolutely adore. She's amazing, but again, she's one of like 3 up here, and so actually getting her out in an emergency is next to impossible. She does her best. It's not that she doesn't want to. She just can't. You know, she's running cattle, sheep, horses, and sometimes goats if she has time. So nine times out of 10, I do my own doctoring, and it's because I sat down with a vet and was like, hey, what do I do here? And then I've also had some mentors who have taught me how to handle these situations, how to pull, in my case, how to pull, you know, a baby goat, or how to, you know, I use super glue on when I suture until my vet can get there to reduce the bleeding. I had to do that to save my horse. I mean, it's one of those things that if you don't have a vet, then you have to do what you need to do to keep your animal alive and take care of it. So just keep that in mind when we're talking about poisonous plants and things like that. Get with your vet, any vet, and get a relationship established if possible, because that's going to be 9 times out of 10, they're going to be your best friend, and they're the ones doing a call and be like, hey, my sheep is bloating. My ewe is bloating. What do I do? They can't get there. Okay, that's fine. Here's how to tube, you know, things like that. Doing a lot of self-study is also really great. It helps the vet out when you're like, hey, I understand how to do this. Am I doing this right? And that way you know how. So having that vet is huge. That being said, we also are working with, yes, pay your vet, treat them well, respect them. They're amazing. We are working with the Arizona State Vet's Office to come up with a series of emergency how-tos for livestock care. So that'll be over the next year. And then if you're in the Holbrook area, we're having a livestock and range meeting, and one of the afternoon sessions is going to be all about how to care for your animal. How to care for your animal in an emergency situation, and how to do a first aid kit. And then our livestock specialist is going to bring up some animals, some like plastic animals that we're going to practice on. It's like pulling a calf, or, you know, doing something like that. So, and Leslie, the mobile vet's name is Dr. Guff, I believe. I'll put it in the chat. She's amazing. Okay, let's see here. I had way too many squirrel moments there. So sheep cannot graze everything, and there are poisonous plants they can't graze. So if someone comes to you and is like, hey, I want to get a sheep, I'm just going to throw them out there, be like, hey, don't do that. Like, that's not cool. Okay, it's 6:40. I want to spend a few minutes on products, because that is 9 times out of 10 why somebody has a sheep. Wool is huge. I get so many phone calls of people that are like, I want to raise sheep for wool, and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to like become a millionaire on wool. And we're like, timeout. So meat is another one, and I'm learning now that horns are one. And what are some other products, Cindy, that you can get from sheep?
Well, one thing to think about, and I learned this from some of my mentors who happen to be Navajo, is that there's no such thing as a bad sheep or bad wool or bad anything. We just need to learn how to use it. Okay. So one of the things to remember is that we can be very utilitarian with our sheep, and the wool can be used so many different ways. A high quality hand spinning fleece, that's one thing. You can turn it into roving and yarn. We call that adding value to it, but it adds cost. You don't necessarily get any more money for it than you would as a raw fleece. But then depending on your customers, some are okay with picking out vegetable matter, bits of hay, and washing it and dirt. Others don't want that at all. So you got to understand who you want to sell to. That's on the high end. Now you can also do commercial. You could sell your wool commercially. However, the trouble is the price is very, very low, especially with a heritage breed like mine. But you could sell it commercially into the commercial market as a commodity. You could also learn to use your wool for felting. The wool that's not as good, you can use it for felting, and you can do all kinds of things with that. You can, some people are pelletizing their wool. And there's a couple companies in Utah that are doing this, where they pelletize it and they make, and what they're using it for is they mix it in with potting soil or into gardens because it'll hold water. It's a good mulch. It's good for erosion control. So, you know, there's a lot of things you can do if you're creative. But marketing it, you gotta like marketing, and you gotta like working with people. But once you get a niche and you get some fiber artists that like your wool, yeah, it can go pretty fast. Then the other thing is you can vend it. You can go to fiber shows and vend it. And you've seen booths and stuff set up. Like farmers market, you got fiber festivals. There's a really good one coming up in Flagstaff, the end of May, and then Sheep is Life in June. They're all over. Taos has a big one. So a lot of people get into that because they like marketing and like having that kind of relationship with people. The meat depends. There's a global shortage of lamb and mutton. So United States, most of our meat is imported. Most of our lamb's imported from Australia and New Zealand. On the Navajo Res, a lot of the lamb and mutton are imported. So, you know, I think there's room there. But once again, if you're going to do anything other than a commercial market, a commodity market, you got to learn how to market. You got to learn how to sell, find customers. I don't have too much of a trouble marketing my butcher lambs, but I don't have very many to sell. Most of mine go for breeding stock. So I only do about 10 to 15 a year. And once you get a customer, hopefully they'll come back over and over. I've got customers that they'll only buy my meat because it's antibiotic free. And it's the only thing he can eat because he's got allergies, and he will not eat any other meat at all, just my lamb. Those are really good customers. So I treat them well. I treat them very well. So, so one of the best things you can do is get hooked up to a restaurant that wants to serve your lamb. That's a nice market for a lot of people. So pelts, horns, the more you can get out on an animal, the more you're going to bring in, more income, the greater chance you're going to have to be profitable. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on some key points there, which is marketing. Everybody's always like, well, what's the niche market that I can fit into for my lamb? What is the value added product? What is the, what can I do to make my product sell? And it's like, well, the thing about a niche market is they last for literally 5-10 minutes. And then there's a new niche. Everyone saw it with the soap. Everybody wanted goat's milk soap. And then everyone started doing it. So then now it's flooded the market. So everybody has goat milk soap, but I don't know of any sheep milk soap, or, sheep cheese. And, there's some in the area, but it's hard to find. So finding your niche is key, but if you don't market, no one's going to see what you have. And the big things that I found out is I did not know that, like you'd mentioned, commercial wool you can use for mulching. So, someone had thrown away some wool, so it was going to throw away some wool, so I grabbed it, and I'm actually using it around my apple trees as mulch. And it's fire retardant. So like when I was in the military and then when I was a firefighter, everything we had was wool. So that's a huge one. So just finding this niche market is the hardest part. The other part in our area, and Sydney, I don't know if you have the same problem, is we don't have butchers right now that are available. Mm-hmm. They're backed out years. And then we're working on trying to get mobile butchers, to be able to go up north. But again, that's a ways out because the certification process and people wanting to do it and the prices there. So having someone being able to butcher your meat is sometimes the hardest part of the whole process. Mm-hmm.
Right. And the thing is, in the that's a problem across the whole United States. The average driving distance is 150 miles one way to processor. However, where I live, I'm lucky. I've got one in Monticello, Utah, that's an hour away, and one in Durango, that's an hour away, that are USDA. Now, there's custom processing too, so that's another thing to understand. And if you're gonna resell your meat, like by the package, it needs to be, or sell it through a restaurant or a school, it needs to be USDA inspected. Otherwise, you can use a custom processor, but it'll be marked not for sale. In other words, you can only sell it to the person who's going to use that meat. So there's different ways to go about that too. And there's product liability insurance is another big deal with the meat. I sell whole live animals. I do not sell cuts of meat because I don't want to mess with insurance and regulations and licensing just for 10 or 15 animals. So I have to find 10 or 15 customers that want lamb every year. And like I say, once you get one, you want to keep them. You want to keep your customers because it's hard to go find them. But once you do, and then with the processors, you have to learn to work with them, get on their schedule. I schedule a year ahead of time, and I overschedule. That reminds me, I have to call my processor because I'm only going to bring 4, and I said I was going to bring 7. They're nice. They like me. I treat them well. I treat the vets well too, and I treat my customers well. So if you don't like people and you don't want to do that, think about it, because that's what it takes. A lot of people complain, but I get in because I schedule ahead of time. And then if I don't use my places, I try to find people who need to have processing done. So I'm not putting my processor out. So
Absolutely. And yeah, and you know, get with people, you know, who want to, you know, support mobile processing. Find, you know, I know we're working for, one of the things I'm working on for Cooperative Extension here is trying to put together a mobile processor that would do goat and sheep, specifically up, you know, for the northern section of the state, northeastern section of the state, to support the higher amounts of sheep and goats that are up here. But we need to, you know that that is something that would be feasible and that people would support that based on price, because a lot of it we do want to resale, so we do want someone to be, you know, USDA qualified and all that stuff. So there's process still. I know we're on the books for a cow, or we're supposed to be on the books for a cow here, and we haven't even gotten a cow yet. So I mean, we're a year out. That's just where the processes are. So we haven't even raised our steer yet. So it's really rough, but it is unfortunately a sign right now of what we need to do. Let's see here. We talked about the wool and the niche markets and all that. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Leslie had posted earlier about trying to join the Arizona Wool Producers Group, and you are not the only person that has had this issue. I know several people that have had this issue as far as getting in touch with them and getting the registration form. I don't have a good answer. I don't know if somebody else does and they can kind of post in the chat, but it is something that we are trying to find a way in, or we just don't know what's going on with that. So it's not just you, because I have been wanting to join, and I have 2 friends also that are wanting to join. My mother is a fiber artist and spins, so I'm constantly looking for sources for her. I might just send her to you, Cindy.
So the trouble is a lot of the sheep industry has died a lot. So a lot of the producer groups and stuff are not very functional or non-existent. I mean, New Mexico pretty much lost theirs, and now it's coming back again. It's called the Oveja Project. And so they're trying to bring back a sheep producer, a wool producers association. Colorado, we have one of the more functional ones, the Colorado Wool Producers. However, they are more geared towards your commercial breeds and larger producers than to the smaller producers. And on that note, the average size of the flock now in the United States is actually only 100 animals. So my county, Montezuma County, used to have 80,000 sheep in it back in the 1930s and 40s, and now it has only about 4,000. So that's what's happened, but it's coming back, and there's a demand, and there's even a demand for mutton. New York City, I guess that's a big deal now, mutton. And because the younger generation doesn't have that about it. Personally, I can't tell the difference, so, but some people can, I guess, so.
Yeah, and it's another version of that. It's not even a niche market. It's just, you know, that cyclical marketing where, you know, it is now popular again. Now we're able to market it more, and we're able to say, hey, like, look at all this awesome sheep. Have you had sheep? No, you haven't had sheep. We'll go down to XYZ and try it. Buy a package, try it, and then let us know what you think. And that's worked out really well because we have a small Navajo Churro producer in, oh goodness gracious, out in eastern Arizona, right near the New Mexico border. And he gets it butchered, and it is sold at the honey stand in Springerville, Arizona. And he's able to send people there, and they try it, and then he's getting customers now. And we have butcher shops right now that are looking for lamb producers. So there is the opportunity now to be able to get on the bandwagon for sheep. The hard part is you don't want to go overboard and get so in depth with it that if anything happens to the market, you're not stuck with a lot of animals that you can't do anything with. So finding that sweet spot is going to be in the market. It's going to be the best thing to do. And there's no way to figure that, because you never know when the market's going to go out. Some celebrity may post on Twitter that sheep is the next horrible thing, and all of a sudden the market's out. You don't know. Or they could be like, sheep is the best, and you have like 7 years of amazing luck with having sheep in the market. So that's the hard part. All right, we've got 6 minutes. If you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, or if you feel comfortable, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. And while we're waiting, the award for perfect attendance for these webinars goes to Leslie Laird, who has not let me down once. Gold star, because yeah, I think it's been amazing to have this interaction. This will be my last one for a month while I get the past webinars up on YouTube and on our websites and edited and all that good stuff. And then after that, we're going to try to do another series with llamas and alpacas and livestock guardian dogs and pigs and everything else that we've missed, waterfowl. So nothing. Alrighty. So then, in case anybody has a question, that's fine. Go ahead and chat. Yay. Right on, Leslie. Let's go ahead and Cindy, you want to go ahead and plug your business one more time for those that were not there at the beginning, and tell us all about, you know, just anything.
Well, our farm is called Arriola Sunshine Farm. We've been here since 1987, and I've been raising the Navajo Churro since 2003. And so you can find us on, just look up Arriola Sunshine Farm Navajo Churro Sheep, and you can see all kinds of pretty pictures of sheep on Facebook. I also have videos and other things on there. Our website's arriolaSunshineFarm.com. And my online store is shop arriolaSunshineFarm.shopify.com. I'm on Shopify. I don't have a special domain for that yet, as it's a new venture for me to sell online. But yeah, so feel free to reach out. If you want my emails, arriolasun@gmail.com. I'll write that down. Anyhow, I'm always happy to. Arriola Sun. The other thing is I really, if you're in the Four Corners area, or if you're just in Arizona, the Fiber Fest over in Flagstaff in May and Sheep is Life in June. Those two are really, really good events to go to, just to get around other sheep people, because that's how you really learn more than anything else. And fiber arts as well. Learn your fiber arts. The best way to learn is from each other.
And can you give a quick plug as to what your holistic management is? And I think that's amazing.
Oh. Yes, I didn't really focus on that at all, but I am a holistic management certified educator. I work with Holistic Management International out of Albuquerque. I've been teaching and training for 25 years now. So I work with small farms and ranches all across the United States and even globally. I've worked outside the United States as well. I'm working with some Canadian ranchers right now, working on their marketing. I teach business planning, I teach marketing, I teach grazing planning, I teach decision making, and I've worked all across the Navajo Nation over the years. So a lot of different experience there. So my other business is wholenewconcepts.com, if you want to look that up too. But I don't have much on the web, but you can always look at it. I'm currently teaching a beginning farmers class in Montrose, Colorado. It's a 3-year program, USDA beginning farmers grant. And we just got started a couple weeks ago. So it's a lot of fun. I love working with people like that. So.
I'm kind of thinking we need to steal you for cooperative extension, because you're kind of like,
oh, no.
doing my job.
I've worked with extension in Arizona. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think our intent is to have, like, in the future, have more conversations about this, because this is one of the biggest things that we're working with now is revalidating and revitalizing the agriculture community, especially when it comes to small ruminants, because of grazing issues out here. So yeah, maybe we'll steal you again for some nice holistic management talks.
Oh, sure, no problem. We'll work together. So I'm tied to a lot of resources too, so I could bring other people in.
And then, so I had someone email me, and I keep forgetting to ask it. How much does a Navajo Churro sheep go for per sheep?
Well, it kind of depends on who you're buying it from and what their objectives are. So it's kind of hard to say. On the low end, probably. Okay, prices are going up, folks. Hey, I'm paying $12 a bale. Some people are paying more. It's getting really expensive to feed these guys. So most people are going to be charging $200 or more for weaned lamb. And then the adult mature animals, it just depends on how old they are and how productive they are. I've got some old ladies. I just want to retire. I want somebody to get them for their backyards as pets. And they do make good pets. Sheep do make, at least these guys do. They're all some want to be your best friend, some don't, but the ones that do make really good pets. So but yeah, this year expect prices to go up. Some people are talking about $300. So
that's per lamb. It's not even for adult. Yeah, I just paid in $19.99 for a bale of grass the other day. So so yeah, it is going to be expensive, I think. Yeah, there's no way around that. Okay, cool. Well, we are at time here. It has been 2 hours, and thank you everybody for your participation, and thank you for joining us. It's been amazing. And again, give me a little bit of time before I can get this up on the website, because we do need to edit it and just make sure that everything's clear. But thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you for everybody that has attended. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
And I'm going to throw my address in, and my email address if you have any questions. It's all on the flyer, but just in case. And that way, if anybody has any questions, you can email me, and we can set up a time and we can talk. All livestock, all sheep, one of my favorites. All right, guys. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end this call, and you guys all have a great night.
Okay.
Bye, guys.